The silence was the first thing that hit me, not the usual quiet of an empty house waiting for its occupants, but a hollow, cavernous silence that echoed with absence. I stood on the threshold, my keys still in my hand, a bag of groceries slowly slipping from my other. The air was stale, still, carrying a faint, metallic scent I couldn't place. My heart began to thud a frantic rhythm against my ribs, a primal drumbeat of wrongness. I dropped the bag, the sound of a glass jar shattering unnaturally loud in the void. Milk pooled on the hardwood floor I'd spent a whole weekend polishing just a month ago, a pristine white lake slowly creeping towards the bare spot where our antique console table used to be. That's when my brain finally caught up with what my eyes were seeing. It wasn't just quiet, it was empty. The grand foyer, which once boasted a Persian rug we'd haggled for in a dusty Moroccan souk and a crystal chandelier that scattered rainbows on the walls every afternoon, was stripped bare. The walls were naked, showing faint rectangles of lighter paint where our paintings had hung. Panic, cold and sharp, clawed its way up my throat. I stumbled forward, my shoes crunching on broken glass, my mind a frantic slideshow of possibilities. A robbery, a home invasion. But there was no sign of forced entry, no chaos, no destruction, just a methodical, surgical removal of everything that had made this house our home. I ran through the rooms, each one a fresh stab of disbelief. The living room, with its custom-made sofa and the fireplace we'd cuddle in front of during winter storms, was a vacant cavern. The kitchen, my sanctuary, was stripped of every appliance, every pot, every pan. Even the built-in espresso machine he had insisted on was gone, leaving a gaping hole in the marble countertop. My husband, the thought slammed into me with the force of a physical blow. Where was he? I fumbled for my phone, my fingers trembling so hard I could barely unlock it. No missed calls, no texts. I called him, my breath held tight in my chest. It went straight to voicemail, his cheerful, recorded voice a cruel mockery in the echoing silence. I called again and again and again, the result always the same. I sank to the floor in the middle of the empty dining room, the place where we'd hosted countless dinner parties, celebrated birthdays and anniversaries. The sheer scale of the erasure was terrifying. It wasn't just the furniture, it was the photo albums, the little trinkets we'd collected on our travels, the books that lined our shelves. It was a decade of our life together, meticulously dismantled and spirited away. Then I saw it. A single white envelope propped against the wall where our dining table used to be. It was stark against the dark wood of the floor, a beacon in the desolation. My name was written on it in his familiar, sloping handwriting. With a sense of dread so profound it felt like I was drowning, I crawled over and picked it up. My hands shook as I tore it open. The note was short, brutally so. I'm gone, I've met someone else, she's everything you're not. She's pregnant with my son and we're starting a new life. I've taken what's mine to fund our future. Don't try to find me. The house is all that's left for you. Consider it a parting gift. Every word was a hammer blow, shattering the last remnants of my composure. The air was punched from my lungs. Someone else, pregnant. He had taken everything, our shared life, our memories, our future, and condensed it into a cold, transactional farewell. He had left me in an empty shell, a museum of a life that no longer existed. He'd taken what was his, he'd written. A bitter, hysterical laugh bubbled up in my throat. What was his? The furniture he'd picked out from expensive catalogs but had never paid a cent for. The art he'd boasted about to his friends, art that my inheritance had purchased. The very roof over his head, a roof that had been in my family for 3 generations. The arrogance was breathtaking. The cruelty unfathomable. He thought he had left me with nothing but an empty house, a consolation prize. He thought he had orchestrated the perfect escape, leaving the scorned wife to pick up the pieces of her broken life amidst the echoes of their shared past. But as I sat there on the cold, hard floor of my empty home, a different feeling began to surface, pushing through the shock and the grief. It was a slow-burning ember of rage, hot and fierce. He had no idea. He had no idea of the scale of his miscalculation. He had walked out of this house believing he held all the cards, that he had stripped me of my life. He was so consumed by his own ego, his own narrative of triumphant escape, that he had overlooked one crucial, life-altering detail. He thought he had taken what was his. He had no idea that everything, absolutely everything he had just stolen to build his new life with his new woman had already belonged to me. He had emptied our home, but he had left me with the one thing that mattered, the company. His entire business empire, the one he had built from the ground up, the one he lorded over like a king, was nothing more than a subsidiary of a holding company that was and had always been entirely in my name. He had signed the papers years ago, a formality he'd barely glanced at, too busy playing the role of the self-made tycoon to read the fine print. He thought the company was his power, his leverage, his future. He didn't know it was his leash, and I was still holding it. He had left me in an empty house, but he had just handed me the keys to his kingdom, and I was about to lock him out for good. The initial shock began to recede, replaced by a cold, clear resolve. The tears that had been threatening to fall dried on my cheeks. This wasn't the end, this was the beginning. He wanted a new life, I would give him one, a life where he would learn the true meaning of losing everything. He thought he had the last laugh, leaving me with a hollowed-out home and a broken heart. He had no idea that the real punchline was yet to come. He had started a war he couldn't possibly win because he had stormed the battlefield without realizing I owned the entire territory. I pushed myself up from the floor, my legs unsteady but my purpose firm. I walked back to the foyer, my steps no longer hesitant. I looked at the mess of milk and broken glass on the floor, a symbol of the life he had shattered. But as I looked, I didn't see ruin, I saw a blank slate. He had cleared the board, thinking he'd won the game. He didn't realize he'd just given me the freedom to create a new one with new rules. My rules. I took out my phone again, my fingers steady this time. I didn't call him. I didn't call my friends or my family. I called my lawyer, the best, most ruthless corporate lawyer in the city. As the phone rang, a small, grim smile touched my lips for the first time that day. The game was on, and I was about to make my first move. He thought he was building a new future, but he had just torched his own. He was so focused on his new life, he forgot about the old one, the one that held all his secrets and all his vulnerabilities. He forgot about the documents I had tucked away in a safety deposit box, the prenuptial agreement he'd laughed at, the business incorporation papers he'd signed without a second thought. He was a man so blinded by his own reflection that he couldn't see the cliff edge he was gleefully running towards. He'd left me a note. I would leave him a legacy of ruin. The fury was a fuel, burning away the pain and leaving behind a core of hardened steel. I wasn't a victim. I was the architect of his downfall, and he had just handed me the blueprints. The irony was almost poetic. He had stripped the house to furnish his new life, but every single item he had taken was a piece of evidence against him, a nail in the coffin he was building for himself. I walked through the empty rooms one more time, not with sadness but with a burgeoning sense of power. The emptiness wasn't a loss, it was a liberation. I was free of him, free of the life we had built on a foundation of his lies, and I was about to be very, very rich at his expense. He had underestimated me. He had seen me as a supportive wife, a background character in the grand drama of his life. He had never seen me as an equal, a partner, or, God forbid, a threat. That was his fatal mistake, and I would spend every waking moment making sure he regretted it. The silence of the house no longer felt oppressive. It felt like the calm before the storm, a storm of my making, a storm that would wash him and his new life away. He had left me in the dark, but I was the one who controlled the light switch, and I was about to plunge his world into a blackness from which he would never recover. The game was far from over. In fact, it had just begun. And I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my bones that I was going to win. He thought he'd left me with nothing. But he'd left me with everything I needed, a righteous fury, a brilliant legal team, and the irrefutable, legally binding truth that he was and always had been working for me. The parting gift wasn't the house. The parting gift was his entire future, served up on a silver platter of his own making, and I was hungry. The first phone call was to my lawyer, a man whose reputation for corporate litigation was as sharp and unforgiving as a shard of glass. I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I laid out the facts with a detached precision that surprised even myself. I told him about the empty house, the note, the other woman, the pregnancy, and then I told him about the holding company. There was a pause on the other end of the line and then a low whistle. He really has no idea, does he? He asked, a hint of admiration in his voice. None, I confirmed, the word tasting like victory. He thinks he's a self-made man. He's forgotten who financed his first office, who co-signed the loans he couldn't get on his own, who structured the entire business to protect our assets. Our assets. It was funny how that word had changed its meaning in the space of a few hours. Before it meant our shared life, our future. Now it meant my ammunition. The plan was simple and brutally effective. We would let him think he had gotten away with it. We would let him settle into his new life with his new family funded by my money. We would let him get comfortable, complacent. And then we would pull the rug out from under him so completely that he would never find his footing again. The first step was to freeze everything, not in a way that would alert him immediately, but subtly, systematically. I spent the next few days in a hotel, a war room of one, with my laptop and a burner phone. With my lawyer guiding me, I exercised my rights as the sole owner of the parent company. I initiated an immediate and comprehensive audit of the subsidiary, his company. I put a stop on all major expenditures, citing financial irregularities and the need for a full review. I changed the security protocols for the corporate bank accounts, locking him out of any significant transactions without my explicit digital countersignature. He wouldn't notice at first. The day-to-day operations would continue. Payroll would be met, small invoices would be paid, but if he tried to make a large purchase, say a new house for his new family or a lavish gift for his pregnant mistress, he would find his access denied. He would assume it was a banking error, a bureaucratic glitch. He would be annoyed but not alarmed, not yet. The next step was surveillance. I hired a private investigator, a discreet professional recommended by my lawyer. I didn't care about the sordid details of his affair. I didn't want pictures of them holding hands or kissing in public. I wanted financial intelligence. I wanted to know every penny he was spending. I wanted to know where he was living, what car he was driving, what promises he was making to his new woman. The investigator's first report was illuminating. They were living in a luxury rented apartment downtown, the lease signed a month ago. He had bought her a brand new luxury SUV, a push present, apparently. He had been wining and dining her at the most expensive restaurants in the city. All of it, every last cent, was being charged to the corporate account. His arrogance was my greatest asset. He was so confident in his untouchability that he wasn't even trying to hide his tracks. He was flaunting his new life, paid for by the old one he had so casually discarded. While he was playing house, I was rebuilding my fortress. I went back to my empty house not to mourn but to work. The emptiness was a clean slate. I hired contractors to change the locks, to install a new security system. I started the process of refurnishing, not with the things we had chosen together, but with things that were solely mine. It was a symbolic act, a reclaiming of my space, my life. I also started quietly divesting. The art, the jewelry, the other assets that were in my name, I began to liquidate them, converting them into fluid capital. I was preparing for a long fight, and I wanted to have a war chest that was completely independent of the business. I wanted to be able to live comfortably, to fund this legal battle without ever touching the money that was tied up in his, or rather my, company. The weeks turned into a month. The audit I had initiated was proceeding, and the preliminary findings were exactly what I had expected. He had been using the company as his personal piggy bank for years. Lavish vacations, expensive gifts, undocumented business expenses that coincided with trips he had taken alone. It was a pattern of deceit and entitlement that was about to become his undoing. The private investigator's reports continued to paint a picture of a man living a fantasy. He was telling his mistress that he was on the verge of a massive expansion, that he was about to take the company global. He was promising her a life of unimaginable luxury, a life built on a foundation of lies and theft, and she, it seemed, was believing every word. The first sign that he was feeling the squeeze came in the form of a frantic call to the company's CFO, a man I had personally appointed and who was loyal to me. My husband had tried to put a down payment on a multi-million-dollar house, and the wire transfer had been blocked. The CFO, following my instructions, played dumb. He blamed it on the new banking protocols, on the ongoing audit. He assured my husband it was a temporary issue that would be resolved soon. My husband, according to the CFO, was furious. He had screamed, he had threatened, he had demanded immediate access to his money. The CFO had stood firm, calmly explaining that his hands were tied until the audit was complete. It was a beautiful performance. The pressure was building. I could feel it, a tightening of the net I had cast around him. He was a lion in a cage, rattling the bars, not yet realizing the bars were of his own making. He still thought he was in control. He still thought this was a temporary inconvenience. He had no idea that the walls were closing in, that the air was getting thinner. I made my next move. As the sole director of the holding company, I had the right to call a board meeting. A board meeting of one, me. In that meeting, I passed a resolution to suspend the CEO of the subsidiary company, my husband, pending the results of the financial audit. I drafted the letter myself with my lawyer's guidance. It was cold, corporate, and utterly devastating. It cited gross financial misconduct, misappropriation of company funds, and a breach of fiduciary duty. It informed him that he was suspended, effective immediately. He was to have no further contact with company employees, no access to company property, and his corporate accounts and credit cards were canceled. I had the letter delivered by a courier to his luxury love nest. I can only imagine the scene. The confusion turning to disbelief, the disbelief turning to rage. The confident tycoon, the master of the universe, being told he was no longer in charge. His pregnant mistress, who had bought into the dream of a life of luxury, suddenly seeing the first cracks in the facade. The beauty of it was that he had no recourse. He couldn't fight it. He had signed the documents. He had given me this power. He had been so busy building his empire that he had forgotten to check who owned the land it was built on. The day after the suspension letter was delivered, my phone rang. It was him, the first time he had called me since he had left. I let it ring, my heart pounding a steady, triumphant beat. I let it go to voicemail. His message was a torrent of rage and confusion. He demanded to know what I thought I was doing. He threatened to sue me, to ruin me. He called me every name he could think of. It was the impotent roar of a defeated animal. I listened to the message, a small smile playing on my lips. Then I deleted it. I would not engage with him directly. Everything would go through our lawyers. That was the rule of this game. He had made it personal. I was making it professional, and in the world of corporate law I had all the power. The suspension was just the beginning, the audit was nearing completion, and the evidence it had uncovered was damning, enough to not only fire him but to potentially press criminal charges. He had been so reckless, so arrogant that he had left a paper trail a mile long. The empire he thought was his was about to crumble, and I was the one holding the demolition button. He had left me in an empty house, but I now controlled his entire world. He was a king who had just discovered his throne was made of cardboard and the rain was starting to fall. He had tried to erase me from his life, but he was about to find out that I was the author of his story, and I was about to write a very unhappy ending. The game had entered its next phase, the phase where the prey realizes it's been cornered, the phase where the hunter prepares for the final move. He thought he was the hunter. He had no idea that he had been the prey all along, and I was about to enjoy the kill. The final report from the auditors was a masterpiece of financial forensics. It was a thick, bound volume that detailed, line by line, my husband's systematic looting of the company. It was more than just evidence, it was his confession, written in the language of expense reports and wire transfers. With this document in hand, I made my final move. I convened an emergency meeting of the board of the holding company, which, of course, consisted of me, my lawyer, and a newly appointed independent director. The vote was unanimous. We terminated his employment for cause, effective immediately. We also passed a resolution to pursue all legal avenues to reclaim the misappropriated funds, including civil litigation, and referring the matter to the district attorney for criminal investigation. The termination letter was delivered the same way as the suspension notice, by a stoic courier who probably had no idea he was delivering a nuclear bomb. But this time the package also included a copy of the full audit report. I wanted him to see it. I wanted him to read every page and understand the depth of his own folly. I wanted him to know that this wasn't just me being vindictive, this was the inevitable consequence of his own actions, laid bare in black and white. His world imploded. The private investigator's reports became a real-time feed of his unraveling. His mistress, faced with the reality of his fraud and the immediate cancellation of her luxury lifestyle, left him. The investigator sent a photo of her loading suitcases into a taxi, her face a mask of anger and disgust. She, too, had been a victim of his lies, and she wasn't sticking around for the fallout. He was alone, locked out of his office, his bank accounts frozen, his reputation in tatters. He was forced to move out of the luxury apartment, his possessions stuffed into the back of a rented van. The man who had boasted of his empire was now effectively homeless and penniless. He tried to fight back, of course. He hired a lawyer and made noise about wrongful termination. But his legal threats evaporated the moment my lawyer sent his a copy of the audit and the incorporation documents that proved my sole ownership. His lawyer, seeing the unwinnable case, dropped him shortly after. Then came the lawsuits. I filed a civil suit against him for every dollar he had stolen, plus damages. The company, under my new leadership, also sued him for breach of contract and fiduciary duty. The numbers were staggering, a mountain of debt he would likely never be able to repay. The final, crushing blow came from the district attorney's office. After reviewing the evidence we provided, they filed criminal charges against him for embezzlement and corporate fraud. The self-made tycoon was now a common criminal, his face splashed across the business section of the news, not as a success story but as a cautionary tale. I saw him only once through the whole process. I attended one of the preliminary court hearings, sitting at the back of the courtroom. He looked like a stranger. The tailored suits were gone, replaced by a rumpled, off-the-rack outfit. The confident swagger was gone, replaced by a defeated slump in his shoulders. He looked older, smaller, a ghost of the man I had once known. Our eyes met for a fleeting second across the crowded room. In his, I saw a cocktail of hatred, disbelief, and a flicker of something else, utter bewilderment. He still didn't truly understand how it had all gone so wrong. He still couldn't comprehend that the woman he had dismissed as a background character had been the one pulling the strings all along. I felt nothing. No pity, no satisfaction, not even the remnants of anger, just a profound sense of closure. He was a chapter of my life that was now finished, the book slammed shut. I didn't need to see him in prison to feel victorious. My victory wasn't in his punishment, but in my own liberation. I had reclaimed my life, my business, my future. The company, free from his parasitic draining of its resources, flourished under my direction. I implemented new projects, hired new talent, and steered it towards a future he could never have envisioned. I sold the house, the empty shell he had left me in. I didn't want the memories, good or bad. I bought a new place, one that was entirely mine, filled with my own choices, my own style. It was a home built not on a foundation of lies, but on the solid ground of my own strength and resilience. He took a plea deal, avoiding a lengthy trial in exchange for a prison sentence and an agreement to pay restitution, a symbolic gesture given the amount he owed. The last I heard, he was serving his time in a low-security facility, another faceless number in the system. His new life, the one he had been so eager to start, had turned into a nightmare of his own creation. He had tried to take everything from me, but in the end, he had only succeeded in destroying himself. He had left me with a broken heart and an empty house, but he had also left me with an opportunity to rediscover my own power, to rebuild my life on my own terms, and to become the person I was always meant to be, free from the shadow of his ego. He thought he was writing the end of my story, but he had only written himself out of it, leaving me with a blank page and the freedom to write my own happy ending. Thanks listening this story. Now I want to hear your thoughts in the comments. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear right now. Share this story with your friends and don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to Revenge Laura for more episodes.